Tilde. This study is a perfect example of confirmation bias and going into a piece of research with already in your mind exactly what you want the conclusion to be, despite what the data tells you. And after we look at this study and just pick it apart, which is really rather easy, it's simply a case of tug one of the strings and the entire ball falls apart, we're then going to be looking at some of the media reaction to this study, which is also rather alarming because it shows that the media outlets reporting on it didn't actually read the study. It is a paper entitled Insight into Sexism, Male Status and Performance Moderates Female-Directed Hostile and Amicable Behavior. Yes, indeed, it is that study that has spawned all of these recent sexist male gamers are just losers articles. And in order to keep this video under an hour long, I'm only going to be focusing basically on the numeric side of this study. I may come back and revisit the psychological side later, but for now I'm just concerned with the empiricism of the data, especially since that is the side that the media that are getting hold of this study are using to try to push their narrative. So we're just going to leap straight on into the materials and methods section of this paper. Ethics statement. Neither written nor verbal consent to participate in this study was collected by the authors, specifically because all individuals that participated in the study were anonymous, as players used pseudonyms, and had already agreed to the terms of Xbox Live, which state that conversations can be recorded. Because of these aspects, and that data from this study was obtained from a prior study, the Ohio University Institutional Review Board determined that this study was exempt from IRB review under Category 4, Research Involving Collection or Study of Existing Data. Now, I'd like you to remember the anonymity and pseudonym issue, because that's going to come up later because it's actually quite important and undermines rather a large part of this study. The video game that they chose to use here was Halo 3. I'm not going to read this part verbatim because it's long-winded, but there are a few little key points that stand out here which are rather amusing, specifically the killing opponents results in a positive outcome for the team while dying results in a negative outcome. Now, anyone who actually plays any sort of competitive video game will tell you that this is not actually strictly the case. Certainly in a deathmatch-style environment where a team is attempting to get to a certain number of kills before the other team, yes, that will absolutely be the case. But this actually quite specifically ignores things like objective-focused gaming, such as one team having to occupy a certain area of a map for a certain period of time. If no one in your team is within that area and is just running around killing people, you will still lose the match, because you haven't fulfilled the objective win condition criteria. And the next part which I take issue with here is, in addition, improved performance within a game allows players to attain higher ranks and improve their skill rating, a long-term measurement of player status, i.e. dominance, that is publicly exhibited. Having a high score is not a sign of dominance, it is simply a sign of skill and ability. Or in some cases, simply hours invested, in the case of ascending skill ladders where you can't actually go down the ladder, you can only go up. So this idea that some sort of rank in an online video game is in some way an indicator of someone's social dominance is just an assertion with no proven link whatsoever. But let's move on to the data collection, because this is where things get really bad. So in order to gather the data for this, they basically plugged an Xbox 360 into an audiovisual output into a computer so that they could record the gameplay and the audio being spoken and being heard, so that it could later be coded. And in order to play through the games, 3 Xbox Live accounts were created and assigned to a respective experimental manipulation: control, male, and female. Now this is important because this means that there are 3 different manipulations by which they are playing the game. They are playing a control manipulation which doesn't say anything, they are controlling a male manipulation which speaks only with a male voice, and they are controlling a female manipulation which only speaks with a female voice. And the problems begin immediately. The control condition simply played in matches of Halo 3 as one normally would. However, this condition did not use the real-time voice channel to communicate with other players, and as a result, was not further analyzed here. And this is the first major flaw in their study. Because you don't have to speak in a video game in order to be spoken to. So by intentionally ignoring the control manipulation in the end results, they have shrunk the pool from which they can draw any result from. And this also ignores the fact that even though you can stay silent in a video game, someone can still say something positive to you or something negative to you or something neutral to you, even though you have not engaged in the conversation. And I can't help but think that the reason that they have intentionally left the control group out is to artificially inflate the numbers towards the end, but we'll see why when we get there. For the male and female manipulations, the researchers also played in the matches as expected, but also developed a list of roughly a dozen phrases that were recorded separately by a male and female voice, S1 text, which we'll look at later. These phrases were broadcast during the games to other players using the real-time voice channel. These pre-recorded phrases were identical in the male and female condition, harmless in nature, and designed to be inoffensive. Phrases included, "I like this map," "Nice shot there," "I had fun playing that game," "I think I just saw a couple of them heading this way," and "That was a good game, everyone." Now, the next paragraph they witter on about when it was important to broadcast them and so on and so forth, and I don't really care about that, but what I do care about is this first sentence. In Halo 3 Xbox Live matchmaking system, up to 8 individuals, 4 on each team, are matched up against other players by the system according to their skill level. Now, this is quite important. 8 individuals per match, and we're going to see why later in the results section, which we're going to get to right now. The people who did this study played a total of 163 games of Halo 3 in the 2 manipulations. They stopped at 163 as this is a substantial time effort. Data could not be analyzed during the experiment as the transcripts needed to be transcribed. Of the 163 games, 82 were in the female manipulation and 81 were in the male manipulation, and players only spoke within 102 of the games. A total of 189 players spoke in these 102 games. All of them were male. Now, anyone who is versed in mathematics and common sense will notice something here. Each one of these matches had 8 players. Now, we have to knock one player off because that's going to be the researcher, so there are 7 strangers in each one of these matches, which gives you a total of 1,141 strangers. Now, if you do a little bit of maths, you will then actually find out that that is 16.5%. So in an online video game, just under 1/5 of people will actually even bother speaking, using the numbers that they've provided. Now, with less than 1/5 of people even speaking, I find it very unusual that the first line of their abstract is "Gender inequality and sexist behavior is prevalent in almost all workplaces and rampant in online environments." Yeah, right. Sexism is rampant in online environments where 16% of people will even talk to you. And that's before we've separated the good from the bad comments. Over 80% of people will not say anything, but sexism is rampant, damn it. And I'd like to point out that that 16% figure is ignoring the control group as well. So in reality, the number of respondents is smaller. But let's continue onwards. This is not to say that women did not play, just that they did not speak. This does, however, reinforce the fact that women are entering a very male-dominated environment. No, it doesn't. You see, you don't actually know that there were any women playing at all. You are simply making the assumption that there were. Now, it's very likely that there were women playing the game, but you do not know that for 100% fact. You are making an assertion. Unless, of course, you checked the gamer profile of every single person who played that game, and they had some sort of indicator that they were male or female on, say, their Xbox Live profile. Now, I don't know if that's a thing, because I've never used Xbox Live. It might be, it might not be. Otherwise, you are just making an assumption. And in this instance, you are making an assumption to make an assertion based on your preconceived bias. And this is why the anonymity and pseudonym clause from earlier in this study was so relevant. The researchers themselves expressly pointed out that there was no way of knowing the sex of the people on the other end of that internet game. Yet here, they are going to tell you with 100% certainty that there were definitely women involved, and they just didn't speak because reasons, with no evidence at all. Of these individuals, 147 individuals were teammates of the experimental player, and 47 individuals were opponents. For our analysis, we focused on teammates as these individuals interact with the experimental player for the duration of the game. Opponents, in contrast, only interact with the experimental player for a short period, less than 3 minutes, in the lobby after the game. Of the 147 teammates, 82 individuals were in the female manipulation, and 65 were in the male manipulation. So by shrinking this sample size even more, you're now looking at about 13% of all of the people who were actually involved in the gaming experience at all. So far, we have 147 people, which is 13% of everyone who was involved in this gaming experience, and somehow this is going to be used to show that sexism is rampant in video gaming, when currently overwhelming evidence is pointing it the other way. And in regards to actually sexist comments, if you actually look at their results file, which you can find on the bottom of their study, and scroll down looking at the column for instances of sexism, you will only find 11 instances of so-called sexist language. That is 11 instances, not even 11 people, just 11 instances of sexist speak. Now, even if we make the assumption that it is 11 people, when we reference that to the 1,141 that they interacted with, that gives you about 1%. Yep, so out of the 1,141 people who played the game, 189, which is 16% of them actually spoke, and out of the 189 of them who spoke, 11 of them, which is 1% of the 1,141, or just under 1%, said anything sexist. And yet sexism is rampant in online video games. But why is this important? Well, it's important because the researchers clearly noticed how low this number was and had to fiddle with the results in order to push that percentage higher, because they have confirmation bias and are trying to push a narrative. And in order to do this, they looked at the female manipulation exclusively. Out of all those participants, only 11 of them were sexist. Now, this isn't really statistically significant, but that's quite an important point. So what the researchers did was they made it so that only participants that played with the female experimenter were looked at. This has cut down the number of participants to about 246 rather than the 574. 3 of those people obviously on the side of the experimenter, 4 on the other side. Remember, they are only looking at their own teammates. This, if you look at then the number of sexist comments, still only gives them about 4.5% of the participants who spoke saying sexist comments, and they needed to get this higher in order to make it look like there is some sort of sexism going on here. So they removed the participants that didn't speak at all, which cuts down the number of participants to 82, which is enough for them to say that 13% of the participants spoke sexist remarks. So from the 1% reality to their overinflated 13% in their conclusion. And somehow people are still going to take this study seriously. I mean, if this level of manipulation is necessary in your results to push your own narrative, I don't see how anyone could possibly be taking this study seriously at all. The confirmation bias is writ large all over it. Moving on to the discussion part of this paper, because this is where their confirmation bias really shines through. The goal of this study was to examine the moderating effect of performance and skill on the frequency of positive and negative statements towards a female or male voice teammate in an online first-person shooter game, a metric providing insight into sexism. We found that skill determined the frequency of positive and negative statements spoken towards both male and female voice teammates. In addition, poorer performance, fewer kills and more deaths resulted in more negative statements, specifically in the female-voiced manipulation. Which I find rather a hilarious conclusion, because if you consider figure 1, the predicted number of positive comments as a function of manipulation and maximum skill level achieved, you will notice that yes, while female players received a lower number of positive comments based on lower skill level, whereas men seem to have been given more positive comments when their skill level is low. As you can see, when female skill level excels, they will receive a disproportionate large amount of positive attention over males, something which this study seems to have ignored. Figure 2. The predicted number of positive comments is a function of manipulation and the relative difference in maximum skill level achieved. Again, shows the same pattern. That if a woman is significantly worse than a male player, yes, they are slightly more likely to receive positive comments, which does not necessarily mean they are receiving negative comments, it just means they are not receiving positive comments. But you will notice that it follows the same pattern, that when a female player is specifically better than a male player by a large amount, she is more likely to receive more positive attention than a male will. And then figure 3 is increasingly amusing. You will notice that even though as female deaths increase, the number of negative comments increases, you will notice that the growth is considerably sharper for that of a male. So in other words, if you're a male and you really suck at a video game, you will be shit-talked considerably more than a female who performs poorly. Conversely, the second half of this, the number of negative comments related to the number of kills, you will notice that females who basically kill nothing, yes, they will receive more negative attention than a male, but you will notice that the negative attention the males receive is consistent regardless of how well they do, whereas females are able to reach this kind of point where eventually these negative comments disappear entirely. This is hardly indicative of crazy amounts of sexism. What it actually seems to be showing is that women are given preferential treatment and are treated better than males who they outperform. So if you're a female and you are particularly good at a video game, you will be given a disproportionately large amount of positive attention, and that when you achieve something well, you can effectively eliminate negative attention, whereas males cannot. And yet these are all points which are completely absent from their conclusion. So these conclusions, apart from being horrendously misleading and based on data that was quite heavily doctored after it was gathered, there was also a little bit of data fiddling going on during the gathering process. As we established earlier, the kill-to-death ratio was one of the key factors that they used to assess skill level throughout this entire experiment. They also used whether a game was won or whether a game was lost as an indicator of skill as well. And there are some rather interesting anomalies in the data that they've gathered, most notably that they are skewed in favor of the male players. That is, the male and female manipulations did not play equally. In fact, the male manipulation during this experiment consistently outperformed the female manipulation, which actually in itself renders all of their conclusions to be null, because all of their conclusions are based on equal input and equal output, which is not something that they have achieved, nor have they factored this difference in. As I said, I am only concerned with the raw data of this experiment. I have not covered any of the psychological elements that they went into in this paper. Because frankly, when your data is this erroneously gathered from the get-go, you can't make heads nor tails of anything from it. The only actual safe conclusions that can be drawn from this paper is sexism is not prevalent in online engagements. Indeed, verbal communication is not prevalent in online video games. And that players who perform worse are shit-talked more than players who don't. And that players who perform well are shit-talked less than players who don't. Thanks, science! I'm so glad that you've answered the question that gamers have known the answer to for decades. And all of these problems are before we even begin to consider other factors such as Halo 3, a game that was released back in 2007 and has had multiple sequels released after it, which is going to have a knock-on effect on the potential sample size of people that you can use. And yet, despite this myriad of problems, despite the fact that the science in this paper is god-awful, absolute trash-tier research, this paper is unsurprisingly being used by the progressive media to start attacking gamers. Because hey, if you've ever said anything to a woman that's negative online, it's 'cause you're a loser. You know what? I am just fucking done with this. This paper and all of the people waving it around as if it's proof of anything, it's just absolutely mind-bending. It just makes me look at these people and think, how can you look at this and draw any sort of rational conclusion from it? And the answer is, you can't. The only way that you can look at this study and think that it proves anything is if you don't actually read the study, or if you read it and you just don't understand it. Or if you're one of these idiots who blindly believes that because something comes out of academia, it must be right. And the worst part about this shoddy piece of research is that it was publicly funded to the tune of 375 grand. I have no words. I'm done. I am fucking done with this. I'm fucking triggered.